Kelvorn had served the Valanxi Empire for 47 cycles, and in all that time he had never once questioned an order from high command. But standing on the bridge of a human vessel, surrounded by the soft pink creatures his people had dismissed as weaklings for centuries, he found himself questioning everything he had ever known. The orders had come 3 days ago, delivered by a Concorde messenger drone that materialized in the command chamber of his warship. The Galactic Concorde had brokered an emergency alliance between the Valanxi Empire and the Human Federation, and Kelvorn had been chosen to serve as liaison officer aboard a human carrier called the Relentless Dawn. The reason for this unprecedented partnership was simple and terrifying. The Hollow had returned. The Hollow were not alive in any way that organic species understood. They were machines, ancient and hungry, programmed by a civilization that had died 1,000,000 years before the first Valanxi crawled from the swamps of their homeworld. They consumed organic matter the way fire consumed wood, breaking down living creatures into fuel for their endless expansion across the stars. No species had ever defeated them, and every attempt at negotiation had ended in silence and death. Kelvorn remembered the briefing, the holographic images of worlds stripped bare, of populations numbering in the billions, reduced to nothing but scattered bones and empty cities. The Hollow did not hate organic life. They simply used it, the way a Valanxi might use a piece of fruit. There was no malice in their actions, only efficiency, and somehow that made them more terrifying than any enemy Kelvorn had ever faced. Now he stood on the bridge of the Relentless Dawn, his scaled hands clasped behind his back, watching humans move around him with an energy he found exhausting. They talked constantly, these creatures, their voices rising and falling in patterns that seemed random. They touched each other on the shoulders and arms, exchanged smiles and jokes, laughed at things Kelvorn could not understand. Did they not realize they were sailing toward their possible deaths? "You look uncomfortable," a voice said beside him, and Kelvorn turned to find a human male watching him with pale blue eyes that seemed to hold no fear at all. The man was of average height for his species, with dark hair cut short and a face marked by scars that told stories of battles survived. He wore the uniform of a commander, and his posture radiated quiet authority. "I am Kelvorn," the Valanxi officer said, inclining his head in greeting. "I have been assigned to your vessel as liaison officer." "Jake Harris," the human replied, extending his hand in that strange gesture humans used. Kelvorn had been briefed on this custom, so he reached out and allowed the human to grip his scaled fingers. The handshake was firm, but not aggressive, a gesture of equals meeting for the first time. "Welcome aboard the Relentless Dawn, Officer Kelvorn. I hope you find our hospitality acceptable." "Your vessel is adequate," Kelvorn said, which was not entirely true. The ship was impressive by any standard, a massive carrier capable of deploying hundreds of fighters and housing thousands of crew members. But Kelvorn was not ready to offer compliments to a species he still did not trust. Harris smiled, and there was something knowing in that expression, as if he could see right through Kelvorn's careful neutrality. "Let me introduce you to my tactical officer," he said, gesturing toward a young human female who approached with quick steps. She had brown hair pulled back from her face, and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with sharp attention. "Lieutenant Amy Dawson," she said, offering her own hand for Kelvorn to shake. "I have studied Valanxi military tactics extensively. I look forward to learning from your experience." Kelvorn did not know what to make of this. In his culture, junior officers did not speak so boldly to their superiors, and they certainly did not express eagerness to learn from former enemies. But there was no mockery in the lieutenant's voice, only genuine interest, and Kelvorn found himself nodding in acknowledgement of her words. "Your fleet departs for the Kessler system in 6 hours, Kelvorn said, directing his attention back to Commander Harris. My people have 3 vessels joining the task force. We will coordinate our attack patterns through standard Concord protocols. Good, Harris said, his expression growing serious. The Hollow have surrounded a colony of 3 million people. We have maybe 72 hours before their harvesters begin processing the population. Every hour counts. Kelvorn studied the human commander's face, searching for some sign of the fear that any rational being would feel in this situation. He found none. Only determination and something else he could not name. Something that burned behind those pale eyes like a flame that refused to die. Your people seem unconcerned with the danger, Kelvorn observed, gesturing toward the crew members who continued their work around the bridge. They laugh and make jokes. Do they not understand what awaits them? Harris was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice was softer than before. They understand perfectly, he said. That is why they laugh, because they might not get another chance. Before Kelvorn could respond, a young human male approached with a datapad in his hand. He was shorter than Harris, with sandy hair and a face covered in small brown spots that humans called freckles. His uniform identified him as a sergeant, and his smile was wide and genuine. "Sergeant Danny Cole," he said, snapping a quick salute to his commander, before turning to Kelvorn. "I have been assigned as your guide while you are aboard. Anything you need, just let me know." "I require nothing," Kelvorn said stiffly. Danny Cole's smile did not waver. "Well, if you change your mind, I am at your service. Have you eaten yet? The mess hall is serving something that is almost edible today. You should try it before we jump to Kessler." Kelvorn wanted to refuse, to maintain his distance from these strange creatures, but something in the young sergeant's open expression made him hesitate. There was no guile there, no hidden agenda, only a simple offer of companionship from one soldier to another. "Very well," Kelvorn heard himself say. "Lead the way, Sergeant." As they walked through the corridors of the relentless dawn, Kelvorn observed everything. He watched human crew members working at their stations, running through pre-battle checklists, checking and rechecking their equipment. He noticed the way they moved, quick and purposeful, their soft bodies hiding a surprising amount of strength. He saw the way they looked at each other, the silent communications that passed between friends who had served together through countless dangers. In the mess hall, surrounded by humans who talked and laughed and ate their simple food, Kelvorn felt something shift inside his chest. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. The first crack in the wall of contempt he had built around himself. He did not yet know that this crack would grow into a chasm, that these strange, soft creatures would change everything he believed about courage and sacrifice and what it meant to be a warrior. He did not know that the horror waiting for him in the Kessler system was not the Hollow at all. The true horror was humanity itself, and Kelvorn would never be the same once he understood why. The fleet emerged from hyperspace into a nightmare that Kelvorn would remember for the rest of his days. The Kessler system was filled with hollow vessels, thousands of them, black geometric shapes that seemed to absorb light itself. They hung in the darkness like pieces of a broken god, silent and patient and hungry. "Hollow fleet detected," Lieutenant Dawson announced, her voice steady, despite the horror displayed on every screen. "Count is approximately 4,000 vessels. This is 3 times the number reported by intelligence." Kelvorn felt his heart stop for a moment. 4,000 vessels against their combined fleet of maybe 500. The mathematics of this battle were simple and brutal. They could not win. They could not even survive. He looked at Commander Harris, expecting to see the same realization dawning on the human's face. Instead, he saw something that made no sense at all. Harris was smiling. "Well," the commander said calmly, "I suppose we will have to work a little harder than expected. All hands, battle stations, launch all fighter squadrons, signal the fleet to form up on our position." Kelvorn grabbed Harris by the arm, a breach of protocol that would have earned him punishment on any Velanxi vessel. "Commander, you cannot be serious. The enemy outnumbers us 8-1. We must retreat and regroup. We must call for reinforcements." Harris looked at Kelvorn's clawed hand on his arm, then met the Velanxi's eyes with that strange calm that was beginning to terrify Kelvorn more than the Hollow themselves. "There are 3 million people on that colony," he said quietly. "Children, families, people who are counting on us to save them. We are not leaving." "But we will die." "Probably," Harris agreed, "but not until we have done everything possible to save those people. Now, please release my arm, Officer Kelvorn. I have a battle to fight." The next hours became a blur of fire and death that Kelvorn could barely process. The Hollow attacked in waves, their weapons tearing through shields and armor as if they were made of paper. Velanxi vessels died first, their proud warships crumbling under the assault. Kelvorn watched the flagship Eternal Glory, home to 3,000 of his people, disintegrate in a flash of light that left nothing behind. He waited for the humans to flee, for them to recognize the hopelessness of their situation and retreat to save themselves. Any rational species would do the same. Survival was the first law of existence, the foundation upon which all other things were built. But the humans did not flee. Instead, they pushed forward into the swarm, their fighters weaving between enemy vessels with movements that seemed almost suicidal. Kelvorn watched a squadron of human pilots dive directly into a formation of Hollow destroyers, drawing fire away from a damaged Velanxi cruiser. 3 of the fighters were destroyed instantly, but the cruiser escaped. "Why?" Kelvorn whispered, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Why would they sacrifice themselves for a Velanxi ship? Danny Cole appeared beside him, the young sergeant's face pale, but determined. "Because those are our allies," he said simply, "and we do not leave our people behind." "But they were not your people. They were Velanxi." Danny looked at Kelvorn with an expression of genuine confusion. "Today, everyone fighting the Hollow is our people." The battle raged on, and Kelvorn witnessed acts of courage that defied everything he understood about warfare and survival. He watched the marine transport Braveheart take hit after hit, its hull torn open in 17 places, its atmosphere venting into space. The ship was dying. Everyone aboard knew it was dying, but the captain refused to turn away. "Braveheart, you must withdraw," the tactical officer shouted over the communication channel. "Your hull integrity is critical." "Negative, Relentless Dawn," came the reply, the voice crackling through damaged speakers. "We have 1,000 Marines aboard, and those colonists need boots on the ground. We are continuing our approach." The Braveheart made it to deployment range before finally breaking apart. In those last seconds, every single drop pod launched, carrying Marines toward the colony below. Kelvorn counted them. 1,000 pods falling through fire and debris, 1,000 humans descending into hell, because 3 million strangers needed their help. Then, the Hollow breached the Relentless Dawn. A boarding vessel punched through the carrier's hull, and Kelvorn found himself face to face with the enemy for the first time. The Hollow drones were horrifying up close, metallic shapes that moved with an efficiency that was almost beautiful. They had no faces, no expressions, nothing that could be read or understood. They were simply machines designed to kill, and they were very good at their purpose. Human Marines charged the boarding party without hesitation, their magnetic rifles blazing. Kelvorn drew his own weapon and joined them, fighting beside creatures he had once despised. The corridor became a slaughterhouse, bodies falling on both sides, the air filled with smoke and the screams of the wounded. He saw her then, a young private whose name tag read Ortiz. She was small, even by human standards, with dark hair and eyes that held no fear at all. A Hollow drone had broken through the line and was advancing toward a group of wounded soldiers who could not defend themselves. Private Beth Ortiz did not hesitate. She threw herself onto the drone, wrapping her arms around its metallic body, holding it in place. The drone's internal systems overloaded, triggering a detonation that killed her instantly. But the 11 wounded soldiers behind her survived. Kelvorn stared at the place where the young human had been, his mind refusing to accept what he had witnessed. She had been perhaps 20 years old, with her entire life ahead of her, and she had thrown it all away to save people she probably did not even know. After the battle, after the Hollow had been pushed back and the boarding party destroyed, Kelvorn found Commander Harris on the bridge. The human looked exhausted, his face covered in sweat and grime, but his eyes still held that strange fire. "Why do your people fight this way?" Kelvorn demanded, his voice rough with emotions he could not name. "Why do they throw themselves into death so willingly?" That young female, Ortiz, she had no reason to sacrifice herself. Those wounded soldiers were not her family, not her friends. Why did she die for them? Harris was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "Because someone had to," he said. "And if not her, then who?" Kelvorn had no answer to that question. The first battle ended in a costly stalemate. The colony was saved for now. The Hollow pushed back to regroup, but a third of the fleet was gone. Thousands of lives lost, and the enemy would return soon with even greater numbers. As Kelvorn walked through the corridors of the damaged carrier, past wounded soldiers and exhausted crew members, he began to understand something he had not expected. He had not been fighting alongside allies today. He had been fighting alongside something far more dangerous than the Hollow themselves. He had been fighting alongside a species that did not know how to quit, that did not understand the concept of acceptable losses, that would burn itself to ashes if it meant protecting one more innocent life. For the first time in his long career as a warrior, Kelvorn felt something he had never experienced before. He felt afraid of his own allies. And somewhere deep inside him, he felt the first stirrings of something else. Something that might have been respect. The surface of Kessler 4 was a frozen wasteland, and Kelvorn had never felt so cold in all his life. The Valanxi were reptilian, their bodies designed for warmth, and this ice world seemed determined to kill him before the Hollow even had a chance. He had volunteered to join the Human Marine Detachment, a decision that still surprised him. When Commander Harris asked why he wanted to go, Kelvorn could not give a proper answer. Something had changed inside him during that first battle, something he did not yet understand. He only knew that he needed to see more, to understand these strange creatures who fought with such reckless courage. Captain Nate Brennan led the Marine squad, and he was unlike any soldier Kelvorn had ever met. The man was quiet, almost gentle, with hands that moved with surprising delicacy when he tended to wounded soldiers. But in combat, those same hands became instruments of death, quick and precise and utterly without mercy. The squad's mission was simple in concept, but nearly impossible in execution. Stop the Hollow harvesters from reaching the underground bunkers where the colony's population had taken shelter. The harvesters were massive machines, each one capable of processing thousands of organic beings per hour. They had already begun digging toward the bunkers, and time was running out. For 3 days and nights, they fought without rest. The Hollow sent wave after wave of drones against their positions, and the humans held the line through sheer determination. Kelvorn fought beside them, his plasma rifle growing hot in his clawed hands, his body aching with exhaustion. He had never experienced combat like this, endless and brutal, and seemingly without hope. On the second day, Corporal Sam Reyes performed an act that Kelvorn could not forget. A Valanxi soldier had fallen wounded in open ground, caught between the defensive line and an advancing Hollow formation. Any attempt at rescue would be suicide. Sam Reyes did not hesitate. He sprinted into the open, grabbed the wounded Valanxi by the arms, and began dragging him back towards safety. Hollow fire scorched the ground around him, missing by centimeters. Halfway back, Kelvorn saw that Reyes was leaving a trail of blood in the snow. When they finally reached cover, Kelvorn realized the corporal had lost 3 fingers to frostbite during the rescue, the flesh blackened and dead. Reyes looked at his ruined hand, shrugged, and picked up his rifle with the other. "Good thing I can shoot with both hands," he said, and returned to the firing line. The medic, a young woman named Laura Kent, worked miracles under conditions that should have made medicine impossible. Kelvorn watched her perform surgery in a frozen trench, her hands steady even as plasma bolts screamed overhead. She saved 17 lives that day, including 2 Valanxi who would have died without her care. When Kelvorn asked her why she risked herself for aliens, for former enemies, she looked at him with tired eyes and smiled. "A patient is a patient," she said. "Their blood might be different colors, but they all want to live. That is enough for me." On the 3rd night, everything changed. A harvester broke through the defensive perimeter, its massive drills tearing through rock and ice as it descended toward Bunker 7. Kelvorn's blood ran cold when he learned what Bunker 7 contained. 400 children, the youngest members of the colony, hidden away in what was supposed to be the safest location. Captain Brennan gathered the remaining squad members, humans and Valanxi together, in a small chamber near the bunker entrance. Their ammunition was nearly exhausted, their weapons damaged, their bodies pushed far beyond the limits of endurance. They were in no condition to fight. "The evacuation tunnels will take 3 hours to move all the children," Brennan said, his voice calm, despite the desperation of their situation. "We need to hold the harvester at the main entrance for at least that long. I will not lie to you, most of us will not survive this. I am asking for volunteers only." Every single human raised their hand. Kelvorn stared at them, these battered, exhausted, wounded creatures who had every reason to retreat, every justification for saving themselves. They had fought for 3 days without sleep. They had given everything they had. No one could blame them for wanting to survive, but they raised their hands anyway. And Kelvorn, to his own surprise, raised his hand as well, not because he believed they could win, not because he thought survival was possible. He raised his hand because he could not do otherwise. Not after what he had witnessed, not after fighting beside these incredible beings. Captain Brennan looked at Kelvorn and nodded, a simple gesture of acceptance that meant more than any medal or commendation. "Thank you, Officer Kelvorn. Today you are one of us." They held for 6 hours. The ammunition ran out in the first hour, and they fought with improvised weapons. Pieces of metal torn from the walls, rocks pulled from the frozen ground, anything that could damage a hollow drone. When those failed, they fought with their bodies. Kelvorn used his claws and teeth. The humans used their fists and feet, and the sheer stubborn refusal to stop fighting. The harvester pressed forward, and they pushed back. Drones poured through the entrance, and they destroyed them. Soldiers fell, and those still standing closed the gaps. It was not a battle. It was a war of attrition, each side grinding against the other, until nothing remained. Kelvorn lost track of time. He lost track of everything, except the next enemy in front of him, the next threat to be eliminated. His body moved on instinct, striking and dodging and fighting with every bit of strength he possessed. When the reinforcements finally arrived, when fresh Marines poured through the tunnels with weapons blazing, Kelvorn could barely stand. He looked around and saw that only 4 of them remained on their feet: himself, Captain Brennan, and 2 human soldiers. Brennan had 17 wounds, his body covered in blood, both red and the silver fluid that leaked from damaged hollow drones. One of his arms hung useless at his side, and his face was a mask of pain. But he was still standing, still holding a piece of metal in his good hand, still ready to fight. All 400 of them had been evacuated through the emergency tunnels. 400 young lives preserved because a handful of broken soldiers had refused to give up. That night, in the medical bay of a rescue ship, Kelvorn sat alone in a corner, while human doctors treated his wounds. He was shaking, though not from the cold. The tremors came from somewhere deeper, somewhere he had never explored. And then, for the first time since he was a hatchling, Kelvorn wept. The tears surprised him. Valanxi did not cry. It was considered a sign of weakness, something to be ashamed of. But he could not stop them from falling. They ran down his scaled cheeks in rivers of salt water, and he did not try to hide them. He wept for the soldiers who had fallen. He wept for Private Ortiz and all the others who had given their lives. He wept for the 400 children who would grow up never knowing how close they had come to death. But mostly, he wept because he finally understood something he had never expected to learn. He understood that courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was being terrified, being exhausted, being broken in body and spirit, and choosing to fight anyway. The humans had taught him that, and Kelvorn would carry that lesson for the rest of his days. The Strategic Council convened aboard the Relentless Dawn, and Kelvorn stood among the gathered officers, feeling more out of place than ever. His body had healed from the battle on Kessler 4, but something deeper had changed inside him. He was no longer the same warrior who had arrived on this ship just weeks ago. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded the human forces, a woman whose silver hair and lined face spoke of decades of service. She stood at the center of the command table, her eyes moving across the holographic display that showed the current tactical situation. The news was not good. "The Holo have retreated to the outer system to regroup," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command. "Our intelligence suggests they are calling in reinforcements. Within 72 hours, they will return with a fleet 3 times the size of what we faced in the first battle." Murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. 3 times the size meant 12,000 vessels against their battered fleet of barely 300. The mathematics had been unfavorable before. Now, they were impossible. "We cannot win this battle," a Valanxi admiral declared, his scales flushing with agitation. "We must evacuate the colony and retreat to defensible positions. To remain here is suicide." "The evacuation ships cannot arrive in time," Admiral Sullivan replied calmly. "Even if we started now, we could save perhaps 100,000 people. The other 2,900,000 would be left to the harvesters. Then we save what we can. That is the rational choice. That is the only choice." Kelvorn watched the argument unfold, but his attention kept returning to the human officers around the table. They were listening to the Valanxi admiral's words, but none of them seemed to agree. Their faces held something else, something Kelvorn was only beginning to recognize. "We are not leaving," Commander Harris said quietly, and the room fell silent. "Those are our people down there. Human, Valanxi, every species in this colony. We do not abandon our people." "You would throw away the lives of your entire fleet for a colony that cannot be saved?" Harris looked at the Valanxi admiral with those strange, calm eyes. "I would throw away my own life 1,000 times if it meant giving those people one more day of hope." It was then that Admiral Sullivan did something unexpected. She called for classified information to be displayed, information that only the highest levels of human command were supposed to know. The holographic display changed, showing not tactical data, but historical records. "What you are about to see has never been shared with any non-human species," Sullivan said. "I am breaking protocols older than our first contact with alien life. But I believe you need to understand who we are if we are going to fight together." The images that followed shook Kelvorn to his core. He saw a planet covered in ice, humans huddled in caves while massive predators prowled outside. This was Earth during what the humans called the Ice Ages, periods when their entire species had been reduced to perhaps 10,000 individuals. They should have died. They should have gone extinct like countless other creatures. But they survived. He saw plagues that killed half their population, wars that burned entire continents, weapons that could destroy cities in a single flash of light. He saw humans standing at the edge of extinction again and again, staring into the abyss that had swallowed so many other species. And every single time, they came back. "We have faced extinction 7 times in our history," Sullivan said, her voice soft but filled with something Kelvorn could only describe as pride. "Ice ages, plagues, wars, asteroid impacts, our own foolishness with nuclear weapons. Each time, we should have died. Each time, we survived. And each time, we came back stronger than before." She turned to look directly at Kelvorn, and her eyes burned with that same fire he had seen in Harris, in Brennan, in every human he had fought beside. "The Hollow do not understand what they have awakened," she continued. "They think they are facing just another species, just another source of fuel for their machines. They do not understand that humans have been fighting against impossible odds since before we learned to make fire. They do not understand that giving up is simply not in our nature." Kelvorn felt something shift inside his chest, a sensation he was beginning to recognize. It was the same feeling he had experienced in the mess hall, in the battle, in the bunker. It was the crack in his armor growing wider. "But there is something else you need to understand," Sullivan said, and her voice grew even softer. "Something that no other species in this galaxy has ever grasped. We are not brave because we do not feel fear. We are brave because we feel it more deeply than you can imagine." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Every human in this fleet knows exactly how fragile we are. We know how easily we can be broken, how short our lives truly are compared to the vast emptiness of space. We know that we are small and weak, and that the universe does not care whether we live or die." Her eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of every officer present. "And we choose to fight anyway, not because we will win, but because fighting is what makes us human. Because protecting the innocent, standing up for those who cannot stand for themselves, facing the darkness even when we know it will consume us, that is who we are. That is what it means to be human." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Admiral Sullivan outlined the plan. A strike team would board the Hollow command vessel and detonate an antimatter charge at its core. Without the command vessel, the Hollow network would collapse, their coordination destroyed. The swarm would become thousands of individual ships, easy targets for the remaining fleet. But there was a catch. The command vessel was at the center of the enemy formation, protected by thousands of drones and defensive systems. Anyone who went on this mission would not be coming back. There was no extraction possible, no hope of survival. Commander Harris volunteered immediately. So did Lieutenant Dawson. So did 40 other humans, each one stepping forward without hesitation. Kelvorn watched them, these soft creatures who were willingly walking toward their own deaths, and he felt something break inside him. Not break in the way that destroys, but break in the way that frees. He stepped forward as well. Harris turned to him with surprise. "Officer Kelvorn, you do not have to do this. This is not your fight. Your people need you." "My people need to understand what I have learned," Kelvorn replied, his voice steady despite the fear racing through his hearts. "They need to know that courage is not the absence of terror. It is choosing to act in spite of it. I have watched your soldiers die for strangers, fight for causes they could not win, sacrifice everything for people they would never meet." He met Harris's eyes, and for the first time, he did not see the human as an alien, as an enemy, as something other. He saw a brother. "I finally understand what it means to be human," Kelvorn said, "and I find that I want to be worthy of fighting beside you." Harris smiled, that strange human expression that Kelvorn had once found so confusing. Now he understood it perfectly. It was not a smile of happiness, but a smile of recognition. The smile of one warrior acknowledging another. "Then welcome to the team, brother," Harris said. "Let us go show the Hollow what happens when you threaten our people." The Hollow command vessel was a nightmare made solid, a mountain of black metal that drifted at the heart of the enemy swarm. It had no windows, no markings, nothing that suggested it had been built by living hands. It simply existed, ancient and terrible and hungry. The strike team approached in a captured Hollow transport, its systems masked by technology that Kelvorn did not understand. 43 soldiers crammed into a space meant for machines, their bodies pressed together, their hearts beating in rhythms both human and Valency. Commander Harris sat beside Kelvorn, his face calm in the dim light. Lieutenant Dawson checked her weapon for the 10th time. Danny Cole, the cheerful sergeant who had been Kelvorn's first guide aboard the Relentless Dawn, whispered a prayer in a language Kelvorn did not recognize. "Are you afraid?" Kelvorn asked Harris quietly. The commander turned to him and smiled. "Terrified," he admitted. "I have been afraid since the moment I volunteered. But fear and I are old friends. We have an understanding." "What understanding?" "Fear tells me I am alive. It tells me that what I am doing matters. If I was not afraid, that would mean I had nothing left to lose, and a person with nothing to lose has already given up on living." The transport docked with the command vessel, and the strike team poured out into corridors that seemed to stretch into infinity. The walls were made of the same black metal as the hull, and they pulsed with a faint rhythm that reminded Kelvorn of a heartbeat. The Hollow knew they were there. Drones attacked from every direction, emerging from walls and floors and ceilings, their weapons blazing with energy that burned through armor and flesh. The team pushed forward, fighting for every meter, leaving bodies behind with each step. Kelvorn fought beside his human brothers and sisters, his plasma rifle singing its song of death. He watched Danny Cole fall, the young sergeant throwing himself onto a drone that had been targeting Lieutenant Dawson. The explosion took his life, but saved hers. "Keep moving," Harris shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We are almost there." The corridors twisted and changed around them, as if the ship itself was trying to confuse them. But the humans did not stop, did not hesitate, did not slow down. They followed their scanners toward the core, and nothing the Hollow threw at them could break their advance. Amy Dawson took a plasma blast meant for Kelvorn. The shot caught her across the chest and back, burning away half her body armor, and leaving wounds that should have killed her. But she kept fighting. Her movements slower now, but no less determined. "You should stop," Kelvorn told her, supporting her with one arm while firing with the other. "You cannot continue like this." "The core is ahead," she replied through gritted teeth. "I will stop when the mission is complete." They reached the core chamber with only 7 soldiers remaining. Kelvorn, Harris, Dawson, and 4 others whose names Kelvorn had not learned. The core itself was a sphere of pulsing light, suspended in the center of a vast empty space. It looked almost beautiful, if you could forget what it controlled. Harris activated the antimatter charge, a small device that seemed far too simple to destroy something so massive. He set the timer for 60 seconds, then turned to face the remaining soldiers. "Get out," he said calmly. "Use the emergency shaft we passed. There is a small chance you can reach the transport before the detonation." "Commander," Kelvorn began, but Harris cut him off. "That is an order, Officer Kelvorn. You need to survive this. You need to tell the galaxy what happened here. You need to make sure our sacrifice means something." Dawson had collapsed against a wall, her breathing shallow and rapid. She looked at Harris with eyes that were fading, but still held that familiar fire. "I am staying," she said. "I would not make it to the transport anyway. And someone needs to watch your back until the end." The other 4 soldiers looked at each other, then at Kelvorn. "Go," one of them said. "Tell our families we died well." Kelvorn wanted to refuse. He wanted to stay with these incredible beings who had taught him what it truly meant to be brave. But he saw the truth in their eyes. His survival was part of the mission. His story was their legacy. "I will remember you," he promised, his voice breaking. "I will tell the galaxy what you did here." Harris smiled that strange human smile one last time. "Then we will never truly die," he said. "Now go, brother, run." Kelvorn ran. He sprinted through corridors that seemed to close behind him, his legs burning, his heart pounding. He could hear the hollow drones pursuing, could feel the ship itself trying to stop him. But he did not slow down. He could not. These humans had given their lives for him, and he would not waste that gift. He reached the transport with seconds to spare. Throwing himself into the pilot's seat and launching away from the command vessel just as the antimatter charge detonated. The explosion was blinding, a sphere of pure energy that expanded outward and consumed everything in its path. The command vessel ceased to exist, and with it, the network that controlled the hollow swarm. Across the system, thousands of enemy vessels went silent, their coordination destroyed, their purpose lost. The human fleet attacked with everything they had left, and the battle was over within hours. Years later, Kelvorn stood before a memorial on Earth, a simple stone wall bearing the names of those who had fallen at Kessler. The names stretched across the surface in neat rows, thousands of them, each one representing a life given in service to others. He traced them with one clawed finger. Jake Harris, Amy Dawson, Danny Cole, Beth Ortiz, and so many more. He knew some of these names personally. Others were strangers whose stories he had learned through records and interviews, but all of them were his brothers and sisters now. He had spent years traveling the galaxy since Kessler, telling the story to anyone who would listen. He spoke to Valenxi councils and Korath assemblies. He addressed the crystalline singers of Veth and the ancient gardeners of the Outer Rim. Everywhere he went, he told them the same truth. He told them about a species that laughed in the face of oblivion, about soldiers who threw themselves into fire for strangers, about medics who operated under bombardment, and pilots who rammed their ships into enemy vessels. He told them that humans were afraid, that they felt fear more deeply than any species he had ever known. And then he told them the part that mattered most. The humans fought anyway. Not because they were certain of victory, not because they did not value their own lives, but because fighting was what made them human, because protecting the innocent, standing against the darkness, refusing to give up even when all hope was lost. That was who they were. The memorial bore an inscription at its base, words that the humans had carved into the stone. Kelvorn read them aloud, his voice carrying across the silent garden. They were afraid. They came anyway. And Kelvorn, the Valenxi warrior who had once thought humans weak, who had dismissed them as soft and short-lived, bowed his head before the names of his fallen friends. He did not weep from sorrow. He wept from pride. He wept because he had been given the greatest gift any warrior could receive, the chance to fight beside true heroes. He wept because he finally understood what it meant to be touched by horror. Not the horror of the hollow, but the beautiful, terrible horror of humanity. And he knew that as long as he lived, he would carry that horror within him like a flame, passing it on to everyone he met, until the entire galaxy understood the truth. Humans were not the strongest species, they were not the smartest or the longest lived, but they were the bravest, and in the end, that was all that mattered.